I have a confession to make. I am not what you would call a master gardener by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, before I got married, I didn't really care much at all about plants. I was like a meat and potatoes guy, and so didn't have a whole lot of concerns about plants. My mom still says one of the greatest miracles that has ever happened is that my wife got me to eat vegetables. So that became, I think, her mission before we had children. Because then she said it numerous times, Suze, I love you. I know you're in Builders today. You did good. But for the 5 years that we were married before we had kids, her primary argument as to why I should eat vegetables was because we were going to have children one day who would need to eat vegetables, and if Dad wasn't, what were we going to do? So, it took me 5 years. I started eating, I actually like most vegetables, except for Brussels sprouts, sorry. But something happened, right? Something happened in the process that changed me from someone who was, let's say, plant averse to plant friendly. I fell in love. In fact, I fell in love with a self-professed tree hugger from New England. No judgment, folks. I know this is Parker County. But from the moment I met Susan, she was just always trying to save life around her. She was looking for ways to preserve and protect life. In fact, her senior year of high school, she spent hundreds of hours in the Chippewa River studying the ecological impact of algae bloom on something. I think. So glad she's not here right now. One of my favorite photos of her is with these, hip waders on, and just spending her whole senior year in a river. You see, because I fell in love, something strange kind of happened. My concern for the world around me began to grow. I started paying attention to plants. In fact, I even know the difference between a ranunculus and a rhododendron. I even said the words right, I think. Where's Susan? By the time we got married, I was actually digging up perfectly good grass in my yard, relocating it and creating a place for us to have additional plants. Voluntarily. What happened? How does that happen, right? How do you go from an old way of life and that was replaced with a new one? And the only answer I have for you, the one that I think matters most in my own marriage, it was love, right? Love inspired me to learn. Love inspired me to grow. Love inspired me to grow new things. I'm definitely not a master gardener, but I can usually spot the difference between a weed and a flower, actually. I'm allowed to garden. I'm allowed to do weeding now. So I've grown. I've stepped up. I've learned to tell when a plant's been overwatered or underwatered or root bound. That's a thing. Did you know? I genuinely care about plants now because I'm in love with a gardener. As we continue our journey through the statements of Jesus that he made about himself, we need to understand something. That in the ancient world, vineyards were everywhere in Israel. Grapevines were one of the most important agricultural crops in the entire region in which Israel existed. Wine was safer to drink than water. Grapes were a primary food source. Entire economies depended on vineyards, including the trade industry with multiple other countries. In many ways, the people of Israel, they were centered around vineyards and wine and grapes. But growing grapes required a tremendous amount of patience. A vineyard owner might wait 3 to 4 years before the first vine produced their first fruit, and even that might not be usable at that moment. And what we've learned, if you've spent any time at a vineyard, that farmers constantly prune their branches. They remove dead wood. They would carefully cultivate the soil because they knew one simple truth. Fruit only grows when the branch stays connected to the vine. I mean, you figure this out, right? You understand, if you try to grow anything, if a plant becomes disconnected from its source of life, what happens? It withers and it dies. If a branch is cut off, it might look fine, even for a few days. You notice that? You cut off a branch, it lays there 4 or 5 days, and it looks green and happy. A couple of weeks later, you walk by, and it's withered and brown and gone. Eventually, the life drains out of it. What Jesus does in John chapter 15, Jesus takes this everyday picture that his brothers and sisters, his family members, his disciples, they would be so familiar with this illustration of a vineyard. And he uses it to explain something profound about our relationship with him. In John 15, starting at verse 1, Jesus says, I am the true vine. Those 2 little words that we're spending the next 6 weeks talking about. The I am, where Jesus says, I have been, I am now, and I will always be the true vine. If you haven't been here for the last few weeks, just want to keep you up to date. We're taking these 7 weeks leading up to Easter, and we're wrestling with Jesus in his own words. We're exploring what is known as the 7 I am statements of Jesus that are contained in the Gospel of John. And the goal is really simple. It's to wrestle with this one question. Who did Jesus say he was? Not just who do we think he is, who does the church say he is, who do other people believe Jesus to be, but Jesus in his own words. And thus far, we've seen a number of different statements. 4, actually. First one is before Abraham was, I am. If you missed that one, go back because it's an important one. It's the focal I am of the other 6. And then Jesus said, I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the good shepherd, and today he says, I am the true vine. The question that all of us have to wrestle with, the thing that I'm hoping as we kind of barrel our way towards Easter and Good Friday and celebrating both the death and resurrection of our Savior, who did Jesus say he really was? But if we're going to understand this statement, if we're going to understand what it means for Jesus to be the true vine, let's do a little context. Let's do some history. All right, we're going to go to John chapter 15. If you have your Bibles with you, it'll be in the New International Version. It'll also be on the screen. John 15, I want to give you the rest of John 15, 1 and 2. Jesus says, I am the true vine. All right, I'm going to stop. There's 3 primary components, 3 primary aspects of this story that are listed in the first 2 verses. See if you can figure them out, okay? 3 kind of key figures. Jesus says, these are the words of Jesus in John 15, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. Okay, did you pick up the 3 parts? There's a vine. What's the next one? Gardener. And then there's a branch. Okay. Hold that in your mind. Because the rest of what we're going to talk about this morning, it's important for us to maintain a clear awareness of who the gardener is, who the vine is, and who the branch is. So again, I say context is key. Throughout the Old Testament, the people of Israel were often described as a vine. It happens over and over. You see, God had chosen Israel to be his special people through Abraham. Remember that process and the promise he made that he would make Abraham into a great nation, and then that nation would bless all of the other nations. So God had chosen the people of Israel. God had planted them. If you pay attention in the Old Testament, maybe even through the Psalms and stuff, that word planted comes up over and over again. God had planted Israel in the land that he had chosen for them, and a fertile soil. Remember the promise to the Israelites as they were going to take the new land, right? A land flowing with milk and honey, a rich soil. God had cared for them, the people of Israel, and God had protected them, as a gardener does. But time after time, you know what happened, right? Israel failed to produce the fruit that God desired. Listen to how the prophet Isaiah says it in Isaiah chapter 5, verse 1. This is an illustration of the way in which Israel is the vine and God is the gardener. I will sing for the one I love. This is Isaiah speaking on behalf of God to the people of Israel. This is God speaking to Israel. I will sing for the one I love a song about his vineyard. My loved one had a vineyard on a fertile hillside. He dug it up and cleared it of stones and planted it with choicest of vines. He built a watchtower in it and cut out a winepress as well. And then he looked for a crop of good grapes, but it yielded only bad fruit. Hundreds of years, God gardened, protected, made sure there was fertile soil of his vine. And over and over and over again, the Israelites turned their back on God and failed to produce the fruit that he was looking for, that he was calling out of their lives. And so let's fast forward. Probably 600 years from Isaiah to Jesus. When Jesus says, I am the true vine, do you understand what he's saying? Jesus is making a radical claim in this moment, right? He is saying, Israel failed, religion failed, human efforts have failed, but I am the only way to true life. He's taking 600 years of failed crops and saying, I am the source of true life. Because religion without connection to Jesus produces no real fruit. You ever seen that before? Can you think of examples of where religion, disconnected from Jesus, what does it produce? Often ugliness, right? The kinds of fruit that comes out of just a Jesus-devoid religion does more harm than good. Because you can go to church, you can serve in a ministry, you can quote Bible verses, you can do religious things, but if you are not connected to the vine, if you're not connected to Jesus, eventually the life drains out of us because we are not connected to the source of life. Any religion without a connection to Jesus produces no real fruit. And this is Jesus' point in John 15, 1 and 2. That if we're going to have genuine life, we must stay connected to the vine. So let's go on. John chapter 15, starting at verse 4. Jesus says, remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. For I am the vine, and you are the branches. And if you remain in me, and I in you, you will bear much fruit. For apart from me, you can do. Can we please say it together? Nothing. Apart from me, you can do nothing. I want to make sure, friends, if you've come from like a hyper-religious context that was filled with a whole lot of do's and don'ts and rights and wrongs and goods and bads, okay? I want to make something abundantly clear this morning. Jesus is not calling us to try harder. He is calling us to stay connected to him. There is a difference. Our journey with Jesus is a partnership, not a religious system, where we put ourselves in a place where we can stay connected with the vine, and then the life of God flows through us and the fruit comes out of us. All right, I want to offer 3 truths from the true vine. Came up with that one all my own. 3 truths from the true vine, okay? Number 1, life comes from connection, right? Think about this. That branch that gets cut off, it has no independent life of its own. None. A branch only survives because it's connected to the vine who feeds it. Nutrients flow through the vine. Water flows through that vine. Life flows through that vine. And the branch by itself contributes nothing. Because apart from me, you can do nothing. A branch has one job. You ever thought about that? Hold on to the vine. One job. Stay connected to the vine. And then Jesus says the same thing about us, right? Jesus says, if you stay connected to me, then life will flow through you and fruit will come out of you. But if you are disconnected, you will have not only no life, but no fruit. Whereas the world says, try harder, work more, do more, achieve more. You ever heard that one? Whereas the world says more, more, more. Achieve, acquire, produce. But Jesus says in John 15, apart from me, you can do nothing. Okay, but here's the problem, right? Here's the thing that kind of trips us up in our world today. The reality is, sometimes we can, right? At least momentarily. I mean, think about this. People all around us are accomplishing things, aren't they? That may or may not be connected directly to Jesus, right? People build businesses, they build homes, they earn degrees, they create success, they start relationships. And Jesus is not at all in the center of those things, right? And so we are lulled into this false sense of like productivity. We think that like our getting stuff done is actually producing life. As we build these businesses and our homes and our degrees and our success and our 401ks and our relationships, we do all this building, but spiritually, Jesus is saying, without him, there is no eternal fruit. It doesn't matter. Eventually, it just gets burned up in the fire. It doesn't last beyond this moment. The businesses fold, the houses burn down, the relationships collapse, and we wind up in the dirt. From dust we came, and to dust we return. We get lulled into this false sense of productivity. We think that our doing is getting us somewhere, but Jesus is saying, without him, there is no long-term fruit. So can I ask you a question? Think about your life right now. Your situation, your family, your relationships, your work life. Where might you be tempted to find life apart from Jesus? Can I ask that one again? Not because I want to, but because I feel like I'm supposed to. Where might you be tempted to try to find life apart from Jesus? Is it your career? Is it your money? Is it your success? Is it your relationships? Is it your influence? Is it your following? Is it your politics? Where might you be trying to find life apart from Jesus? You see, all those things can be good in and of themselves if we're connected to the vine. Family, relationships, career, purpose, right? All that can absolutely be inherently good if we are connected to the vine. But if we are disconnected from the vine, none of them can give us the life that our soul is longing for. And I think all of us has been there in some way, shape, or form. Only the true vine can give us the life that we long for. So first, life comes from connection. Second, truth from the true vine is that fruit comes from abiding. Jesus uses this one word repeatedly. Did you pick up on it? There's a word in these verses that Jesus uses over and over and over again. I'm going to look at it. I underlined them so you can see it. John 15, 4 and 5. Remain, 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 remain. How many is that? 1, 2, 5. In 2 verses. 11 in 17 verses in that whole passage. 11 times in 17 verses, Jesus uses the word remain. Your translation might have the word abide. You ever heard that one? I kind of like the abide word better. Remaining is like I'm just kind of stuck. Abiding to me brings like thoughts of, I'm joyfully connected, right? 11 times in 17 verses, Jesus uses this same word, abide, remain in me. Why? Because spiritual growth does not come from occasional contact. Do you understand what I'm saying? Genuine spiritual growth does not come from occasional contact. It comes from consistent connection with Christ, right? Imagine a branch, okay? Imagine a branch. You're a gardener. You're working on some trees. You got your chestnuts going. Imagine the branch says, hey, gardener, I think I'm going to connect to the vine like once a week. Cool? Right? Imagine a branch telling the gardener that, like, hey, once a week, I'm going to make sure I'm connected to the vine. What would happen to that branch? It's going to die. And yet we as people, we treat our spiritual life that way often, don't we? We check in with God occasionally, go to church on Sunday mornings, maybe say a prayer when life gets hard. But Jesus is talking not about a once-a-week connection, but a daily dependence, a living relationship. Because abiding in Christ means staying committed, connected to the vine through prayer, through the Word, through the Spirit, through service. Like that all of life becomes about the garden in which God has planted us. That it's not just a once-a-week connection with the vine. But be careful, friends. Because the other end of the spectrum, right? On one end of the spectrum is us that feel like, all right, let me connect to the vine once a week, we'll be good. On the other end of the spectrum is like what I call religiosity, where you hyper-focus on the do's and the don'ts and the rights and the wrongs and the goods and the bads, and you start turning relationship with Jesus into a checkbox and a formula. I'm not talking about a religious routine. I'm talking about a relationship. I love the way that John Mark Comer says it. Following Jesus is not a formula, it's a friendship. Underline, hyphen, highlight, circle. Following Jesus isn't a formula, it's a friendship. Because fruit comes from abiding in the vine. Third one. I don't like this one. Okay? I didn't want this one in my notes. Life comes from connection. That makes sense. As long as I'm connected to Jesus, I'm going to experience life. Fruit comes from abiding. That the more I am connected, the more fruit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, like the fruit of the Spirit starts to come out of my life. But this one, I'm frustrated. Okay? Because what we see from Jesus is that pruning produces growth. Notice in verse 2, Jesus says something interesting. Jesus is talking about the gardener. He says, he cuts off every branch in me that does not bear fruit. So if the branch isn't doing anything, it gets cut off, thrown away. But notice which branches get pruned. Do you see this? The gardener prunes every branch that does bear fruit. Do you understand what Jesus is trying to say? The dead and dying branches, they get cut off. But the ones that are producing fruit are the ones that are being pruned. It's the healthy ones that get pruned. Why? The best gardeners in the room know this. Because selective pruning leads to more fruit, not less. When the gardener subjects the branch to temporary pain, it produces a long-term gain. Okay, who's ever watched one of those videos about what happens at the end of a harvest year for vineyards? Anybody ever seen one of those? Okay, that's your homework. And hang out with Jesus. Okay, that's your other homework. Hop on YouTube. Type in something like vineyard after the harvest. And can I just warn you, if you've never seen what happens, pruning looks violent at times. Okay? Right? As long as you have the sped up version on YouTube, look for the 3-minute sped up version where you have this gorgeous green leafy beautiful thing that has just given out hundreds and thousands of pounds of grapes, and then all of a sudden these guys start coming through with these giant loppers and they're going nuts on these things. When they're done, there is nothing green left. Do you understand? You see, pruning leads to more fruit. When the old growth is removed and the branches are cut away, every vineyard owner knows this. Unpruned vines grow wild but completely unproductive. Sounds like me for a good portion of my life. The gardener knows that unpruned vines grow wild but unproductive. They produce no fruit. But pruned vines, they go strong and they're fruitful. And what Jesus is saying is that sometimes God does that in our lives. Sometimes God comes along with these spiritual pruners and he cuts out comfort from our lives. Sometimes God comes along and cuts out plans that we've made that aren't from him. Sometimes he cuts out opportunities that we think have to be ours, that God has to give us. Sometimes the gardener prunes relationships from us, sin patterns from us, old ways of thinking about ourselves and about him. And in the moment, friends, it is painful. I'm not going to lie to you, it hurts. It does. But pruning is not punishment, it's preparation.